The nurse was preparing to cremate a woman who had been declared dead, but when she saw the tears streaming down her face, she was shocked. What if those tears were a sign that she was still alive? This story tells of a courageous struggle on the very fine line between death and life. Press the like button on the video, sit back, and enjoy the story. The room is freezing. The air weighs heavily on her face. Cold white light without human warmth. Lucy Rogers clutches the lavender handkerchief, the soft scent of childhood between her trembling fingers. She takes a deep breath, her arm shaking as she places the handkerchief on Mary Elena Vargas's arm. Mary is motionless, her skin colorless, as if there were only a body there, without a soul. Lucy carefully arranges the white clothing on her chest, adjusts her left arm, aligns her hand. The sound of metal is soft but present, a low squeak of metal gears, constant and annoying, like a mechanical whisper in the back of the room. The silence weighs heavily, each second seeming like an eternity. Lucy feels the handkerchief slip between her fingers. It means something more, the bond with her mother, the smell of the past, nostalgia. She closes her eyes for a moment, just to breathe, to steady the hand holding the light purple cloth. Then a tear falls slowly, running down Mary's cheek. Lucy sees it, and her heart sinks. "No, not now," she murmurs, almost like a plea, wishing that the crying would not interrupt the moment that was supposed to be the end. But it has already interrupted it. She approaches the woman's face. The tear falls and disappears into the dull skin, but it leaves a trace. Lucy stands still, her eyes filling with tears. With tears, her voice caught in her throat. She is afraid she has made a mistake. But there it is on the cold skin, a trace of life. Lucy's hand was shaking. Her heart was beating so hard in her neck that she could hear it. She couldn't just ignore it. Lucy took a deep breath, looked around as if searching for someone to confirm what she had seen. Nothing, just the loud sound of the oven, a metallic squeak reminding her that time was not on her side. With her other hand, she took a small mirror out of her pocket, one she always carried with her. It was old, with scratched edges, an heirloom from her mother. She knelt down slowly, bringing the mirror close to Mary's mouth, barely breathing, afraid of missing any sign. For a moment, the world stopped. The silence was so loud that she could hear even the crackle of her own wrist bones from the tension. Then there it was, a small, almost invisible blur, a slight breath so small that it could have been an illusion, but it was there. Lucy opened her eyes and whispered, "I saw it again in the mirror." Ramiro, the technician, approached and looked too. He didn't want to believe what his eyes were seeing. Not in that place. Not at that moment. He swallowed and muttered softly, as if he were afraid that the echo would confirm something impossible. "It must be condensation. That's all it is." Lucy turned quickly and looked him straight in the eye. Her eyes burned red, filled with fear and certainty at the same time. "No, Ramiro." Her voice came out broken, almost a desperate whisper. "That's not just condensation. I felt it. I saw it." Ramiro looked away. His body was tense, unable to bear the weight of that possibility. It was easier to believe in a cold, technical explanation. He scratched his forehead, trying to convince himself that these things happen. "Lucy, the room is cold. The metal heats up. It can deceive the eye," but even his own breathing was agitated. His hand trembled uncontrollably, showing that he wasn't so sure either. Lucy looked back at Mary. The mirror was still in her hand. She held it tightly, as if it were the only proof she had left. A slight breath could have changed everything. Ramiro looked away. He didn't want to believe it. "I don't know, Lucy." Her voice came out low. "I'd rather believe it was the cold, because if it wasn't that, then we're facing something that can't be explained." Lucy closed her eyes for a moment. The bandana was still in her pocket, holding memories of her mother, holding faith. She pressed the fabric against her chest, as if to give herself courage. She opened her eyes again and looked at Mary, the tear still marked on her face. The glass was still slightly fogged up. Lucy felt sweat running down her back. The small mirror was still in her hand, the slight fogging trapped in her memory, the tear marked on Mary's skin. Nothing left room for doubt in her heart. Lucy's eyes went to the panel next to the oven. The timer was on, the numbers running as if it were a countdown. 20 under 12. 20 minutes remained until the system would start the cremation. Every second that passed was like another deep stab in her chest. Her heart raced, her hands trembled. But suddenly something filled her. She could no longer doubt. Lucy lunged with an unexpected impulse and hit the red button hard. The sharp click echoed in the room. "Stop everything!" Her voice came out loud, broken but firm. Ramiro was startled, his eyes wide open. "Lucy, are you crazy? Do you know what it means to stop a process like this?" She was breathing fast, as if she had been running, her hands clenched, her eyes fixed on Mary's body. "I'd rather be called crazy than let someone go into that oven while they're still alive." "Ramiro, I saw it. I swear I saw it." He ran his hand through his hair nervously. "You're going to lose your job and maybe even more. You're going to get in trouble with the higher-ups." Lucy looked back at the clock on the wall. The numbers read 1945. The second hand ticked mercilessly. Time was no longer just the enemy. Now time seemed to be mocking her. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to catch her breath. When she opened them, her voice was lower but determined. "If I lose my job, so be it. But I'm not going to carry that guilt with me for the rest of my life." Ramiro looked at her, and for a second, said nothing. All that could be heard was the sound of the oven and the ticking of the clock filling the room. His face was somewhere between fear and disbelief. Lucy, however, did not back down. Her finger still pressed the red button, as if it were the only barrier between life and fire. At that moment, the room ceased to be just cold and mechanical. It became an invisible battlefield. On one side was time running out. On the other was the faith and courage of a woman willing to face everything until she lost what she had, so as not to bury a hope that still breathed. The door to the room burst open with force, the sound echoing like thunder in that cold space. The heavy air became even denser when Dr. Salgado entered, his coat immaculate, his face serious, the look of someone who does not accept discussion. He did not even need to see the equipment to understand that something was out of control. The oven panel stopped, the red button still pressed. Lucy stood pale, breathing rapidly. "Are you crazy?" His voice cut through the silence like a knife. "I signed the death certificate." Lucy swallowed but did not look away. Her heart was beating so hard in her neck that it seemed like it was going to jump out. "Doctor," her voice came out low, almost like a plea. "She's not ready." Salgado took a step forward, his face full of anger. "Listen carefully to what I'm saying. Do you want to lose your job? Is that what you want? Throw away years of work because of a simple impression of yours?" Lucy clutched the handkerchief she had hidden in her sleeve. The crumpled fabric between her fingers seemed to be the only thing giving her courage. She took a deep breath and replied, her voice trembling but firm. "I'd rather lose my job than lose someone who may still be alive." For a moment, silence returned. The metal oven crackled, as if reminding them that time waits for no one. The doctor's face grew even harder. He wasn't used to being contradicted very often. His nostrils flared and his jaw tightened, but Lucy didn't move. Her whole body was shaking, but her gaze remained steady, almost defiant. The atmosphere was so heavy that it seemed as if even the room was watching, holding its breath. Ramiro, standing in the background, didn't dare say anything. At that moment, it wasn't just about protocols or signatures or rules. It was about the courage to decide between obeying or believing. Lucy, alone in front of the highest authority, knew she was getting herself into trouble that could cost her everything, but she still stood her ground. Salgado received a call and left the room, leaving her there, wondering if she was going to be fired right then and there, or if she would have time to check if that life was still there. Losing her job hurt, but losing a life? She wasn't going to allow that. The cold in the room seemed to bite into her skin. Lucy, her face tense, placed the oximeter on Mary Elena's finger. Her eyes were fixed on the small screen. She was breathing with difficulty, as if her life also depended on that little screen. The light on the device flashed once, then nothing, then another flash, and then 1%. A chill ran through Lucy's body. Her heart raced. The hand holding the device trembled, but she didn't let go. "Ramiro, look at this." Her voice broke, almost splitting in half. Ramiro approached slowly, his eyes wide open. When he saw the number, the air left him without realizing it. He stood still, as if any movement could extinguish that fragile breath that was appearing before them. The screen flickered again, and the number rose slowly and stubbornly. 2%. Mother of God, Ramiro whispered hoarsely. Lucy bit her lip, trying not to cry. The oven crackled loudly again, as if remembering that it was still there, waiting. The noise made Ramiro shudder. He looked at Lucy desperately, not knowing whether to believe it or run to turn everything off at once. That's nothing, Ramiro said, her voice trembling. Maybe the device is malfunctioning. It could be anything. Thing. She didn't take her eyes off the screen. She was breathing heavily, her eyes filled with tears. Almost nothing is still something, she replied firmly, her voice low but full of certainty. Ramiro shook his head nervously, as if he wanted to protect himself from it all. It's nothing more than that. It's just an illusion. Lucy turned to look at him, her eyes filled with tears, but with a look that shone brighter than her fear. Then I'd rather believe in that illusion than close my eyes and pretend I saw nothing. The screen continued to flicker weakly, fighting against the void. 1%, 2%, 1%, as if life were fighting death, second by second. Ramiro was breathing fast, his chest rising and falling. Lucy, although trembling, did not take a step back. She stood there firm, her eyes glued to that tiny signal, as if with her sheer will she could pull back the life that was slipping away. Lucy did not blink, afraid of losing any sign. Suddenly she straightened up, her eyes shining, but not with fear. It was pure determination. She took a deep breath, and almost shouting, her voice came out firm. Post-mortem reversal protocol. The words bounced off the walls of the room as if they were bigger than she was. Ramiro opened his eyes wide, unable to believe it. He swallowed hard, his mouth dry, his voice coming out in pieces. Lucy, that doesn't even exist. I've never read that in any manual. She turned to him, her face pale but with a strong flame in her eyes, her hand clutching the bandana as if it were a weapon. It exists now, she said without hesitation, her voice broken but strong. Ramiro put his hand to his head, his body trembling. He looked at the oximeter, then at the motionless body on the stretcher, then at her. You're inventing a protocol that could end your career. His voice came out loud and trembling, almost shouting. Lucy took a step forward, looking him straight in the eye. Tears glistened, but did not fall. Ramiro, I'm not thinking about my career. I'm thinking about her, she said, pointing to Mary, her hand steady, as if defending someone who couldn't defend themselves. If there's even the slightest chance, I'm not going to stand by and watch. The technician was breathing heavily, as if he couldn't get enough air. He looked back at the blank panel, the cables, the oven, the woman on the stretcher. His fear was evident, his whole body showing it. Lucy didn't move. Her decision was like a wall, her gaze fixed, her heart racing, but her voice firm. If no one wrote that protocol, I'll write it myself with my own hands. Ramiro closed his eyes and shook his head, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. This is crazy, he whispered. Insane. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low but sharp. Insane is putting someone in that oven without being 100% sure they're no longer breathing. Silence filled the room again. The oven crackled in the background, as if remembering the threat. The oximeter flickered weakly, almost turning off. And there, in the midst of all the tension, Lucy didn't back down. If the protocol didn't exist, she was going to invent it. Because for her, saving a life was worth more than any written rule. The door creaked slowly and hit the wall with a sharp sound. The cold wind came in, bringing with it the smell of the rain falling outside. Diego Vargas, 34, appeared in the doorway. His face seemed to have aged overnight. His red eyes showed hours of crying and regret. His steps were heavy, as if each movement carried the weight of years of unspoken words. He didn't know what he expected to find. He had come for a silent farewell, to ask for forgiveness too late, perhaps just to see his mother's body one last time. But what he found was not silence. It was tension. It was chaos. The oven was off. The wires were loose. Ramiro stood on one side with a distressed look on his face. Lucy stood on the other side, firm, breathing deeply. The oximeter flashed fragile numbers. Diego stood at the door, confused. His eyes searched for the body lying on the stretcher. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, trying to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Finally, with effort, he managed to utter a low, hoarse, "What's going on here?" Lucy lifted her face toward him, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and courage. There was no time for speeches or long explanations, but there was also no way to hide the truth that hung heavy in the air. Diego took 2 steps into the room, his gaze fixed on his mother's body, her pale skin, her still hands, the white sheet. That image pierced his chest like a knife. He took a deep breath, but couldn't let the air out properly. The lump in his throat wouldn't let him. His voice failed him. He brought his hand to his face, trying to hold back the tears, but they fell heavily. I came to say goodbye to her." He closed his eyes tightly, as if that would calm the pain, but he couldn't even speak. He couldn't. Lucy looked at him in silence, a tightness inside her. Diego's pain was not just mourning. It was something bigger, something that came from before. Harsh words, distances, open wounds. Diego approached slowly, stopping next to the stretcher. He looked at his mother's face with a mixture of love and guilt. He touched her arm gently, as if afraid of breaking her. "Mom," his voice broke completely. "I was late, always late." The silence became heavy. The oven thundered again in the background, reminding him that time was running out. Ramiro looked away, unable to bear the scene. Lucy clenched the handkerchief in her fist, feeling that this moment was bigger than all the manuals and protocols. Diego tried to say more, but his mouth wouldn't obey him. Tears flowed uncontrollably. He swallowed hard, but nothing happened. It was as if his own body wouldn't let him let go. What he didn't know, what no one there knew yet, was whether this farewell would truly be the end, or if there was still room for forgiveness, for answers. In that moment, there was only the raw pain of a son who came before his mother with a broken heart, trying to say something he had always put off, and perhaps it was already too late. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder than normal, each second sounding like a hammer blow. A shadow appeared in the doorway. Dr. Salgado now stared at Lucy, his eyes hard, his patience exhausted. He took a deep breath and spat out the words, "Take her to the cold room. Observation. No promises. The responsibility is yours, Rogers." The silence that followed was even heavier. The sentence fell like a verdict. Lucy felt her whole body tremble, her hands sweaty, her heart racing. She knew what that meant. If something went wrong, it would be her name that would bear the blame. His look showed fear. He said nothing, but his eyes said it all. "You're going to destroy yourself with this." Salgado pushed a folder toward her. The pen slid across the table, stopping near her trembling hand. Lucy looked at the paper. Her name was already there, waiting only for her signature. The weight seemed unbearable. Her hand shook so much that she could barely hold the pen. Sweat ran down her forehead. For a moment her eyes filled with tears, but then she clenched her fist tightly, took a deep breath, and signed. The stroke of the pen was shaky, almost crooked, but definitive. As she returned the folder, she knew that she might have just signed her own dismissal, that she might have just buried her career, but what mattered at that moment was another life. Lucy approached the stretcher. Mary Elena's face looked even more fragile under the cold light of the room. The nurse took a deep breath, reached into the pocket of her gown, and took out an old, worn rosary with beads smooth from use. It had belonged to her mother. She held it tightly for a few seconds, as if seeking strength in a simple gesture. Carefully, she placed the rosary between Mary's fingers, crossing the woman's hands over her chest. She stood for a few seconds, looking at this detail as if it were a bridge between what already seemed lost and the hope that insisted on to be born. She leaned her face close to Mary's and whispered with all the sweetness she had, "Mrs. Mary, please come back, come back." Her voice broke at the end. It was a simple request, but one full of love, made on the border between the impossible and the miraculous. The hallway was quiet and cold, smelling of disinfectant. The white light made everything seem even more still. Then a soft, timid sound broke the silence, as if asking for permission. It was a small guitar with worn strings and the finger of an 11-year-old girl. Sophie. She stood at the door sadly, her backpack hanging from one shoulder. She looked inside and saw the stretcher. She saw Lucy. She saw Ramiro. She swallowed her fear and spoke almost without a voice. "Can I play a little, so she's not alone?" Lucy looked at her with a sweet gaze. "Yes, my love," very slowly. Sophie pulled up a metal chair. The scraping on the floor made a harsh sound. She sat down, the guitar trembling in her little hands. She took a deep breath and began. "Cielito lindo." The first note came out crooked. She stopped, made a face, and took another deep breath, as if gathering courage from the air. She tried again. The strings spoke softly. The melody came out simple, short, full of care. Halfway through, her finger slipped, and another wrong note came out. Sophie closed her eyes, bit her lip, and whispered to herself, "Calm down, Pepe." Slowly. Lucy stood next to the stretcher, her hands clasped, the lavender handkerchief tucked into her sleeve. She said nothing, just listened. Ramiro leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, trying to look strong, but his jaw trembled. Sophie took another breath, counted softly. 1, 2, 3. Start again. The music entered like a ray of light into the dark room. It wasn't perfect. It was real. Each chord seemed to ask for forgiveness for being there, but it continued anyway. The sound collided with the cold walls and returned smaller, sweeter. Diego stood near the headboard without touching it. He looked at his mother's face as if asking for forgiveness with his eyes. The melody reached him and broke what little defense he had left. He turned his face to one side and tried to swallow his tears, but he couldn't. Sophie held the last note longer, as if she didn't want to let it go. Her little hand trembled. She repeated the piece, made another mistake, stopped, closed her eyes, breathed, and smiled sadly. "Sorry, I'm nervous," she whispered. Lucy replied in a whisper, "Keep going. It's beautiful." Sophie lifted her chin as if to say, "I'll keep going," and continued. The guitar sounded again, a simple, clean sequence. The melody passed through the door, crossed the room, and reached Mary. It was just then that something small happened. Mary's finger trembled so slightly that one could doubt it, but of course no one could. Lucy held her breath. Diego took a step without meaning to, as if the floor were calling him. Ramiro, without thinking, made the sign of the cross. His hand went to his forehead, his chest, his shoulders in a quick, automatic, almost hidden gesture. When he realized, he lowered his eyes, ashamed of having let his faith slip away. No one spoke for a few seconds. The guitar continued to play more softly, as if respecting the moment. Sophie did not see the tremor. She just played with moist eyes, focused on not making a mistake. Lucy leaned in slowly, as if approaching a secret, and whispered in a voice that only she and the music could hear, "Mrs. Mary, listen, it's for you." The whole hall seemed to breathe together with the melody. She kept stumbling and getting up. Sweet, stubborn girl. The oven in the back ceased to exist for a moment. All that remained was the sound of the strings, and that finger that had trembled. It was a reflection, a response. No one knew, and it was precisely because they didn't know that everyone remained there in silence, waiting for one more chord, one more sign, one more sigh. The cold room became warm for a second that didn't fit on any clock, and the doubt remained in the air, large, squeezing everyone's chest. Was that just a spasm, or did someone call to her from within and she tried to answer? Diego was standing next to the stretcher, his face pressed against his hands. Sophie's guitar was still playing in the background, but to him the sound seemed distant, as if it came from another world. His chest rose and fell rapidly, as if each breath were a struggle. His red, watery eyes could not focus on anything, not on the oximeter, not on his mother's body, not on the cold floor. Lucy noticed. She approached slowly without saying anything and stood beside him, offering her presence rather than answers. Diego swallowed. His lips trembled. He wanted to speak, but no voice came out until, in a whisper more to himself than to her, he let out, I called my mom. Obstacle. The words came out crooked, stuck scraping his throat. As soon as he heard his own voice, he put his hand to his mouth, as if he could take the words back, as if he didn't want anyone to have heard him. Lucy looked at him tenderly, but didn't answer right away. Her silence gave him space for his pain to fill the room. Diego closed his eyes tightly. Thick tears began to fall, landing on his clothes and dripping onto the floor. There was no sobbing, no sound, just that silent crying mute, stifled, more painful than any scream. I told her that, Lucy. Her voice broke again, low, breathless. My mom, the person who cared for me the most, and I had the courage to call her a burden, a problem, a nuisance. She put both hands on the stretcher, her body hunched over as if she couldn't bear the weight of guilt, her face pressed against the white sheet, almost asking for forgiveness with a touch. Lucy, with eyes full of tears, she put her soft hand on his shoulder. She didn't try to justify. She didn't try to explain. She just said softly, "No pain justifies words that hurt, but also no words spoken erase the love that still exists." Diego shook his head, still crying silently, his shoulders shaking, his whole body trembling as if it were about to break. "I don't know if she heard me," Lucy said, choking. "I don't know if before all this—" "Look," she said, pounding her chest hard. "As the last thing you heard from me." Silence returned, heavy. Sophie's guitar continued to stumble along in low, innocent notes. But in Diego's heart, the only thing that bounced around was the word he had thrown at his own mother. Lucy squeezed his shoulder once more, firmly, like someone anchoring someone who is sinking. Broken, Diego fell to his knees next to the stretcher. He grabbed his mother's cold hand tightly, kissed her motionless fingers, and through his tears repeated in a whisper, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." That simple word, repeated over and over, filled the room with a silent cry that could break the heart of anyone there. The hallway became smaller when Dr. Harris appeared. Shiny shoes, serious face, leather briefcase to his arm. The smell of disinfectant, mixed with rain, grew stronger. He entered without asking permission, looking at the entire dimly lit panel. The stretcher, Mary, Diego crouched down, Ramiro stiff, and Lucy standing firm. "This isn't a betting house," he said dryly. "If this goes wrong, there will be a lawsuit and suspension. You know that, Rogers." The word suspension cut through the air. The metal of the oven clicked as if remembering the threat. Lucy took a short breath shallowly. He put his hand in his pocket, squeezing the bandana without taking it out. He didn't look away. "I know," she replied quietly without stuttering. Harris lifted his chin, almost surprised, opened the briefcase, took out a form different from Salgado's, and tapped it with his pen, sign, "Here. It will be clear that it was your decision. No promises, no guarantees. No promises, no guarantees. If something happens, it's on you." Lucy stretched out her hand. The pen slipped a little from her sweaty fingers. She looked at the blank line. The tip trembled. Her heart weighed heavily. The oven creaked again. Ramiro held his breath. Diego didn't move. "Sign here," Harris repeated more quietly, like a final blow. "You sign too," said Lucy, lifting the paper a little. "I'm assuming as you said." He made an impatient shh and pulled the paper to mark the space. He pushed it again. Lucy lowered her head. The sound of the pen on the paper sounded too loud in such a cold room. The line came out crooked and broke in the middle. She returned, signature done, hands trembling. Harris put the sheet away as if closing a door. "Ready? Now it's your problem, and I'm not going to defend mistakes," he warned, already turning to leave. "Let me know if there are any changes on either side." He left. The door closed softly but sounded like a bang. The oven made another noise. The air became heavy again. Lucy put the pen on the table and let out a sigh that seemed to have been held in for hours. Ramiro ran his hand over his face, not knowing where to look. Diego was still there, with guilt weighing on his chest, saying nothing. That's when Dr. Salgado called her. "Rogers, come here a second." He took her to a corner near the metal cabinet. Bright light, no one around. The voice that had been like a knife before now came out low and tired. "They cremated my dad here." Lucy looked up, surprised. He didn't look at her. He was staring at a point in the void, as if he had lost something inside the wall. "I wanted to check again," he said, almost without a voice. "I failed." Silence fell between them. The metal of the cabinet was cold against Lucy's back. She swallowed. Not knowing what to say, the doctor squeezed the pocket of his coat, as if guarding a secret. I didn't tell anyone. He continued without looking because a doctor doesn't fail, right? Or so we pretend. He took a deep breath. I failed. Lucy opened her mouth, but closed it. She had no words. She just wanted to say that she understood that it hurt, but she remained silent, present, the cold floor, the white light, the clock ticking away like giant steps. For a moment, Salgado's face softened, as if he were tired of being stone. He took a deep breath, straightened up, and became serious again, wearing his mask of authority. Even so, the crack remained in his eyes. "Do what you think is right," he said curtly, but without harshness. "And yes, if you need anything, call me." But I couldn't not tell him and wash my hands of it. He didn't wait for an answer. He took 2 steps, stopped, looked into the void again, and continued on. The room was left with the echo of his confession, like an open crack in the tile. Lucy rested her forehead on the cold metal for a second, as if asking for strength, then returned to Mary, her hand still trembling, her name on her lips, and her career hanging by a thread. The oven creaked again, reminding her that the risk was still there, and yet Lucy stayed. She smoothed the white sheet over Mary Elena's fragile body, with the delicacy of someone touching something accured. The fabric fell slowly, revealing the simple dress with faded flowers that Mary was wearing. As she smoothed the bottom of the dress, Lucy felt something hard under the seam. It wasn't the body. It wasn't a wrinkle in the fabric. It was something else hidden there. Her fingertips touched a small but firm lump. She stopped and looked more closely. The seam was crooked, handmade. Lucy ran her fingernail gently along the line, trying to understand. There was a piece of paper inside. A strange feeling crossed her chest. Carefully, she took a small pair of scissors from the pocket of her robe and cut the seam slowly, as if unraveling an old secret. The sound of the thread breaking was soft, but it seemed very loud in that silence. Finally, she pulled out a small yellowed envelope, worn at the corners, folded many times. The shaky letters on the front read, "For Diego. Open only when I die." Lucy stood still with it in her hands. The envelope felt warm, even though the room was cold. It was light, but she felt an invisible weight, as if each letter written there were a piece of life. She ran her thumb over the name Diego carefully, as if caressing something fragile. Ramiro, from the corner of the room, noticed the gesture and asked quietly, "What is that, Lucy?" She didn't answer. No, she was still looking at the letters, feeling her heart beat fast. For a moment she felt that she was holding not just paper, but a bond between mother and son, between guilt and forgiveness, between past and present. Lucy pressed the envelope against her chest, held it gently, closed her eyes. The scent of the lavender handkerchief rose from her pocket, mingling with the moment. She took a deep breath, almost like a prayer. "It's hers," she finally said in a low voice to him. Ramiro lowered his gaze respectfully and asked no more questions. Lucy remained like that for a few seconds with the envelope over her heart, feeling its sweet weight, as if it were passing on a little strength, as if it were warming the words inside. Only then did she open her eyes and look at Diego with swollen eyes, not knowing what she had in her hands. She said nothing, did not hand it over yet, just held it. It was a moment she needed to breathe before existing, because that piece of paper could be a key or a knife, an embrace or a wound. And for an instant, the cold room seemed to stop to look at what was inside that envelope that Mary Elena had kept sewn into her dress. What secret, what request, what living memory was there waiting for Diego? Lucy pressed the envelope against her chest again, as if holding someone else's heart. The doubt hung in the air, bigger than the cold, bigger than the fear, even bigger than the silent oven in the back. The cold light of the room suddenly flickered twice, as if it too were tired. The sound of the rain outside grew louder, beating on the metal roof, mingling with the distant echo of thunder. Every sound seemed to remind them that time was still passing, that the night had no mercy on anyone. Mary responded with 2 spasms, a tremor. Lucy shouted at Diego to get Sophie out of the room. Ramiro crouched in front of the monitor, connected the cables, checked the screen. Suddenly, the alarm went off. Cable error. The screen flashed red. He tapped it, tried to reconnect. Nothing. The machine beeped again, insistently, cruelly. "No, not now," Ramiro muttered with sweaty hands, trying to hold the cables. Come on! Work!" Lucy approached quickly, her heart beating in her neck. She saw the screen flashing the red symbol, and she knew there was no time to wait for the technicians. She took a deep breath and said firmly, almost shouting to herself, not to him, "Without the machine, I'll do it with my hands." She didn't ask for permission. She didn't look at anyone. She placed her hands on Mary Elena's fragile chest. The body felt so light, almost without resistance. Lucy felt the coldness of the skin, but ignored it. She began the compressions carefully, as if pushing life back with her own hands. 1, 2, 3. She counted softly, rhythmically. Diego, kneeling beside her, raised his tear-filled face. Ramiro froze for a second, then began to monitor the oximeter, holding his breath. Lucy leaned closer to Mary's ear, her lips almost touching the cold skin, and whispered with a tenderness that seemed to plead, "Mrs. Mary, your little neighbor needs you. Come back." Her hands followed the movement, gentle and firm. "She misses you. Do you remember when she used to give you bread at the door? Don't leave now." The oximeter screen, which had been almost off, flashed 3%. Ramiro opened his eyes wide, his mouth open, saying nothing. He looked at Lucy, then at Diego. Lucy didn't stop. She was sweating, her body tired, but each compression was like pushing hope into that chest. She whispered again, "Mrs. Mary, listen to the music. Listen to that girl playing outside. She needs you to come back." The number flashed again, 4%. Diego covered his face with his hands, sobbing silently, murmuring between his fingers, "Oh, please, hear me." Lucy closed her eyes for a moment and let a tear fall, but she didn't stop moving. She squeezed and released to the rhythm of her own heart. "It's not time. It's not. You're not going to leave that girl alone." The screen flashed again, 7%. Ramiro let out a loud sigh, almost a sob. "Mother of God," he said, crossing himself quickly without realizing it. The rain fell harder outside. The light flickered again. The oven creaked, reminding them it was there like an enemy lying in wait. But inside the room, the only thing that mattered was Mary's body responding slowly, a tiny flicker in the numbers, as if life, though stubborn, wanted to try one more time. The light flickered, faded again. The rain pounded harder, like hurried fingers on the roof. The cold air cut into her face. Lucy kept her hands on Mary's chest with a steady rhythm, without haste or panic. Ramiro stared at the oximeter without blinking, as if the device could speak for him. The small number flickered stubbornly. No one was breathing well. Dr. Salgado approached, assessed the situation with his eyes, and spoke softly, almost in a whisper, so as not to frighten anyone. "Hypothermia can confuse the signs." He paused, bit his lip, the sweat running down his temple. He looked at the heavy oven door, that metal mouth that seemed to stare back at him. "Protect how?" Lucy whispered, her eyes fixed on him. "The body cools, the metabolism slows. Sometimes he squeezed his own hand, unsure. Sometimes that stops some little of the damage." He looked again at the screen, then at Mary's pale face. "It's no guarantee of anything." Ramiro took a chance, his voice trembling. "So she's... I don't know," Salgado replied, but without harshness. "It could be a reflex. It could be a misreading. It could be life." Salgado took a short breath. "I'm not sure." Silence returned, weighing heavily. The oven door creaked slowly, causing Salgado to clench his jaw. Lucy kept up the rhythm, her mouth almost glued to Mary's ear, continuing to call her softly, as if calling someone who was fast asleep. The clock on the wall seemed to mock their fear. The rain didn't stop. Diego stood trembling, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and opened his mouth as if he could no longer bear the weight. "Doctor," he tried, but no sound came out. He looked at Lucy, asking her permission with his eyes. She sensed it without letting go of Mary. "I need to talk." No one answered. They only heard the fight. Diego inhaled and coughed nervously. He went to the house, the old house. Ramiro turned his face slightly so that he could speak without feeling like he was being listened to. Salgado remained the same, arms hanging down, head bowed, listening. She wanted to sell. Diego spoke slowly, swallowing each word like a stone, and I said no, that the house was the only thing. He paused. A thick tear. I yelled at her a lot. I said a lot of ugly things to her. I left slamming the door like a child. I didn't even turn around. The sound of the rain rose, covering the shame. I squeezed the edge of the stretcher tightly. I told her she was getting in the way of my life, that she was a burden. She closed her eyes tightly, her voice broken. I told her she was a hindrance, and then she shook her head, lost. After that, I didn't know how to take those words out of the air. They remained hanging between us. I pretended not to notice, but they remained. Lucy felt her throat close up. She continued with steady hands, but her voice came out soft, just for him. It hurts to say it, Diego, but you're here. Talk to her. She felt her trembling. Mom rested her forehead on her cold hand. Forgive me. The house was my pride and joy. I was defending a brick, and I hurt your heart. She sobbed silently. I was defending my fear. Salgado took a deep breath at the back of the room, like someone returning from his own abyss. Ramiro lowered his head. The rain set another rhythm. The oximeter maintained its small, stubborn glow. Lucy, without stopping the compressions, whispered, "She's listening to you, Diego. Talk to her like you wanted to talk to her that day." He inhaled, his voice broken. I didn't want to lose you, and I ended up losing you in the worst way." The words came out simple, naked. "Forgive me. The house. Leave it. I got caught up in it and lost sight of you." The room swallowed the rest. The oven door was silent. It seemed farther away. The sound of the rain closer. Hypothermia, protection, doubts. No one knew if that was what kept life hanging by a thread. What everyone knew there was that the fight had a name, home and roots, pride, and that now the request for forgiveness had fallen entirely into the lap of a mother with closed eyes. The rain outside continued to fall heavily, as if it wanted to wash away everyone inside the room. The metallic sound of the oven and the soft beeping of the oximeter mingled with everyone's short breaths. The tension was so thick that even the air felt heavy. Suddenly, slow footsteps sounded in the hallway. They weren't fast. They weren't loud. They were calm footsteps, as if they were in no hurry. Father Tomas entered. His cassock was simple, his face calm, his gaze firm, but without judgment. Sophie had called him, and even though she was only 11 years old, she seemed to know exactly who she needed in the room at that moment. He stopped at the door and looked around without rushing. He didn't ask any questions or offer any ready answers. He just walked over to the stretcher. His presence changed the atmosphere, as if someone had opened an invisible window. Lucy, sweating and still performing compressions, looked up and met his gaze. Him. It was as if the weight she was carrying became a little lighter. The father approached her and touched her hand gently. The gesture was firm, but gentle. He spoke softly, almost as if he were speaking directly to her heart. "God does not shout," he whispers. Lucy closed her eyes for a moment. This was not an order. It was not a rule. It was not a diagnosis. It was just a presence, a reminder that even in chaos, there is a silence that embraces. The father did not give a speech. He did not pray aloud. He did not ask anyone to repeat anything. He just stood there in front of Mary, looking at her with respect, like someone who recognizes dignity even when everything seems lost. The silence that came was not empty. It was full of emotion, but also of respect. Diego, next to his mother, was now crying more quietly, as if the place did not allow noise. Ramiro crossed his arms, but his hand made the sign of the cross without him realizing it. Salgado stood motionless in the background with a serious expression, but his eyes showed the struggle he was going through inside. Then a small, but impossible to ignore detail caught their attention. A tear fell from the corner of Mary Elena's closed eye. It wasn't sweat. It wasn't moisture from the air. It was a thick, slow drop that rolled down her pale skin until it disappeared into the pillow. This time, everyone saw it. There was no longer any doubt. Ramiro covered his mouth with his hand. Sophie put the guitar down on her lap and covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide. Diego let out a loud sob and leaned forward, as if he wanted to catch that tear with his fingers. Even Dr. Salgado saw it, and couldn't maintain his serious demeanor. He lowered his head, his eyes filled with tears, and his voice came out hoarse, without the strength it had before. "Okay, maximum emergency procedure." At that moment, everyone understood. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't a reflex. It wasn't moisture. That tear was living proof that something inside Mary was still fighting. The respectful silence of faith, combined with the quiet crying of a son, Lucy's firm touch, and that single tear rolling down her cheek transformed that cold room into a place where the impossible no longer seemed so far away. Lucy took a deep breath, sweat running down her forehead. She looked for Salgado's gaze, who remained still, his eyes fixed on Mary and his jaw clenched. For a moment it seemed as if he was going to say to stop everything, that it was enough, but then he approached slowly, his voice firm but lower than ever. "Proceed, Rogers." Lucy opened her eyes in surprise. "Doctor, I'm staying with you," he completed without hesitation until the end. It was as if an invisible chain had broken. Lucy felt it, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on Mary's chest. She was very tired, but strength came from somewhere she didn't even know was there. Salgado put a hand on her shoulder, as if to give her a little courage. "Come on," said Lucy in a tone that would not accept surrender. "Come back, Mary. Come back with us." The compressions began again, now faster and stronger. Mary's fragile body moved with the effort, and each push was like a call to life. The oximeter flashed 9%. Ramiro, who was watching as if he were witnessing a miracle, let out the air he had been holding. It went up a little. Lucy didn't stop. She was sweating, her muscles burning, but she kept up the rhythm. With each movement, she murmured, "Come back, Mary. Listen to us. Come back." The screen flickered again, 12%. Diego covered his mouth with his hand, tears streaming down his face. Sophie, with her guitar on her lap, hugged him tightly as if it were a prayer. Lucy quickened the pace, her face very close to Mary's. "You're not leaving now. Come back." The screen flashed insistently again, 15%. Suddenly, Mary's body let out a short sigh, a broken but real breath. That sound filled the room like a silent thunderclap. Ramiro put his hands to his head, unable to believe it, and shouted with a trembling voice, "Mother of God!" Lucy paused for a moment, her eyes wide open and her breath held. Diego knelt beside his mother, grabbed her hand, and cried uncontrollably. Salgado closed his eyes and took a deep breath, as if that sigh had touched his own soul. Diego held the envelope in his hands as if he were holding fire. He looked at the name written there in his mother's shaky handwriting. The silence in the room seemed to grow around him. Outside, the rain continued to beat down on the roof like an old clock. He took a short breath, his fingertips sweating. Lucy approached slowly, her voice very low. "It's for you, Diego. When you're ready." He swallowed hard. "I'm afraid of what's in here. Fear opens slowly," she replied with a sad smile. Diego nodded. He ran his thumb over the poorly stitched seams. They were the stitches of someone inexperienced, but in a hurry, and with love. He pulled carefully. Diego nodded. He ran his thumb over the poorly made seams. They were stitches made by someone without practice, but with haste and love. He carefully pulled the old paper. The envelope crinkled. A soft smell of stored paper wafted up, and the scent rose into the air, as if his mother's memory also had a smell. First, he took out a folded pile of writing from home, thick paper, stamps in the corner, postmarks faded by time, the names Mary Elena Vargas and Diego written there, hard and official. He ran his hand slowly over them, as if he could feel the living room wall, the narrow hallway, the window that rattled when the wind blew. His chest ached. Mom came out in a sigh. Lucy stayed by his side. Silent? Ramiro breathed through his mouth, afraid to make a sound. Father Tomas was a step away, his gaze lowered in respect. He leaned against the wall and said nothing. Sophie sat with her guitar on her lap, hugging the instrument to her chest and making herself small. Diego returned to the envelope. There was another smaller, worn rectangle. He turned the photo over and stood still. In the picture was a boy of about 6 with messy hair, a missing tooth, and a wide smile. Next to him was a younger Mary, with a scarf tied in her hair and a simple blouse. She looked at her son as if the whole world could fit there. The sun came in from the side in the photo, and a dog in the background came out of the corner. Diego touched the boy's face with his trembling fingertip. He turned the photo over. On the back was a short phrase written in blue pen, in round, firm letters full of affection. "If one day I forget how to love you, remind me with a hug." Diego put his hand to his mouth. His body made a sound that was not a loud cry, but a pained moan. He rested his forehead on the edge of the stretcher, clutching the photo as if it were a lifeline in the middle of the sea. "Mom," his voice broke. "I should have hugged you sooner." Lucy put her hand on his shoulder. There was no scolding, only companionship. There was another smaller, folded piece of paper. Diego unfolded it carefully. It was a letter. The paper was soft from being touched so many times. He took a deep breath and read in a low voice, trembling, stumbling over the words. "My son, if you are reading this, it is because my time has come." Carefully. It was a letter. The paper was soft from being touched so much. She took a deep breath and read in a low voice, trembling, stumbling over the words. "My son, if you are reading this, it is because my time has come. I don't want you to fight with memories. The house is nice, I know, but I wanted to sell it for money. I wanted to sell it to pay for Sophie's treatment. I didn't tell you before so as not to hurt you. You are my child. I don't want to see you suffer if one day I forget how to love you. Remind me with a hug. Your hug always heals me. Don't be angry with me. I love you, Mom." The paper fell slightly in his hand, as if it weighed a ton. The name Sophie remained floating in the air, vibrating. Diego slowly raised his eyes, still tearful, and looked at the girl with the guitar. Sophie said, almost without a voice, "It's you." The girl held the guitar tighter and just nodded. Her eyes filled with tears. Her chin trembled. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She stared at Mary as if asking for forgiveness for existing, and at the same time, silently giving thanks. Diego put the photo back on his chest, over his heart, and took the writing with his other hand. All together, the house, childhood, the phrase on the back, the letter. His face broke into quiet tears, without the cries he had kept inside for years, and only now come out. "Mom," he whispered, "I didn't understand anything. Forgive me. You were taking care of me, and I was just fighting." Lucy took a deep breath, her eyes shining, but she said nothing. The paper in Diego's hands trembled. The room became smaller, more intimate. All that could be heard was the rain, a distant whistle in the hallway, and their hearts beating badly. Diego slowly ran his palm through of his mother's hair, smoothed a strand, and placed the photo next to the pillow as if leaving a flower. He held the letter to his chest, as if giving his mother the news she wanted to hear. "If one day I forget how to love you," he repeated, crying softly, "remind me with a hug." Sophie rested her forehead on the guitar. Father Tomas closed his eyes for a second. Ramiro wiped his tears with the back of his hand, pretending he wasn't crying. Salgado took a deep breath, holding back the trembling of his chin, and there, in that cold room, what was inside the envelope ceased to be just paper. It became a hug that crossed time, the writing that weighed less than a gesture of love, the photo that returned the child to his mother's lap, and the letter that simply said everything. Sophie was the little neighbor. Love and sacrifice had a name and a destination, and Diego, with trembling hands, understood in the most painful and beautiful way what his mother had wanted to tell him, without words. The air seemed lighter after the revelation of the envelope, but it was still a fragile thread between life and farewell. Salgado, who until then had remained cold, took a few steps away, took his cell phone out of his pocket with hesitant fingers, took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and dialed the general hospital. His voice came out firm, but with a different weight, as if he had been silent for years. "This is Dr. Salgado. I need immediate care for Mary Elena Vargas, 68 years old, urgent case." He looked at Sophie, who cringed in surprise, hugging her guitar. "Pediatric triage for Sophie, also urgent." Ramiro looked at him in disbelief. Lucy stopped moving her hands for a moment, absorbing those words. Salgado hung up slowly, put away his cell phone, and stood in front of Lucy. His face was softer, more human. Rogers took a deep breath, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry." She opened her eyes wide, and her voice broke. "You said sorry. You were right," Salgado completed, looking her in the eyes. "I didn't want to see it, but you did." Lucy felt her chest fill, not with pride, but with relief. Finally, someone was with her. The tears fell without her trying to stop them. Ramiro turned, unable to hide what he was feeling, too. Diego knelt next to his mother. He didn't hear anything they were saying. His face was resting on her cold hand, silently begging her to come back. It was at that moment that an almost invisible movement occurred. Mary Elena opened her eyes for just a second, but it was enough to cut the air in the room. Her eyes were heavy and red, as if her eyelids were carrying the weight of the world. They searched for something. "Mom," Diego murmured, his voice choked. "I'm here." He took the handkerchief from Lucy's pocket without asking, as if it were natural. He dipped the tip in a small glass of water and gently wiped his mother's cracked lips. The fabric slid smoothly, removing the dried blood. Mary's eyes followed the gesture slowly, with effort, moving until they found her son's face. They stayed there. No were no words, no strength to make a sound, but there was a look, and in that look Diego understood everything. She saw, she recognized. "Forgive me, Mom," he whispered, tears falling on his chest. "Forgive me." Her eyes remained fixed on him for an eternal moment, then closed again slowly, as if resting, not giving up. Diego leaned over the bed, kissing his mother's hand, his body shaken from crying so much. Lucy put her hand on his shoulder. Salgado bowed his head respectfully. Sophie hugged the guitar tighter against her heart. Ramiro made the sign of the cross again, without realizing it, and at that moment, it became clear. Before closing her eyes, Mary had seen someone, her son. She saw her son. Diego's crying still trembled in the air when, without thinking, she took her cell phone out of her pocket. The screen, wet with tears, flickered weakly, reflecting her face. Her fingers trembled as they scrolled through the audio gallery, searching for something. He knew it was there, that message he never had the courage to listen to until the end. "I saved one she sent me," she murmured more to herself than to the others. "I couldn't listen to it all." Her thumb paused over the file. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and played it from the small speaker. Mary Elena's soft voice filled the space, a little hoarse but full of tenderness. "Son, when you hear this, you'll know." The audio stopped there. Diego turned it off before it continued, as if he were afraid to hear the rest, afraid of breaking his heart even more. That little piece remained floating in the air of the room, repeating itself inside each person's head. "You'll know." Lucy stood staring. Salgado closed his eyes as if he also carried unspoken secrets. Ramiro took a deep breath, almost sobbing. Sophie, huddled in a corner with her guitar, seemed to embrace the whole world with her little arms. She raised her tear-filled eyes and looked at Diego, then at Mary with a doubtful expression. She crawled a little closer and sat down on the cold floor with her legs crossed, the guitar slipping through her sweaty hands. "Can I play again?" she asked with a broken voice, almost like a little girl. Diego nodded with red eyes. She didn't have the strength to speak. Sophie took a deep breath and ran her trembling hand over the strings. The first chord came out crooked and scratchy. She bit her lip, stopped, closed her eyes, then opened them again. She looked at Mary's body and tried again. The music came out imperfect, with mistakes, but it came out full of heart. Her voice came in softly, almost like a sigh, but sincere. I. The guitar went out of tune. The melody stumbled. Sophie stopped for a second, filled her lungs with air, and started again. This time not to be perfect, but to be honest. The sound crossed the hallway, touched the coldness of the room, and settled on Mary's skin. The oximeter flashed 18%. Ramiro opened his eyes wide. "It's going up," he said softly, as if afraid of scaring life itself. Lucy brought her hand to her mouth, tears falling on their own. Diego pressed his mother's hand against his face, crying more quietly, rocked by the music. Salgado remained still, but a single tear rolled down the corner of his eye without him noticing. Sophie continued singing, stumbling over the notes, but she didn't stop. Each mistake was followed by a sigh and a new attempt. and each attempt seemed to say, "Even if I'm not perfect, here I am." The guitar sounded like a child's prayer, and in that room full of pain and fear, the music, so fragile and so true, showed that even a small voice could sustain someone's life for a moment longer. Yes, the music helped, and everyone, although silent, cried inside because they knew. The stretcher slid down the hallway, the wheels squeaking on the floor wet from rain that someone hadn't managed to dry. The night air came in through the open door, cold and damp. 2 paramedics carried the stretcher. Lucy was beside them, one hand on the railing, the other holding the lavender handkerchief. Diego walked close behind with his cell phone in his pocket, quietly playing the audio message from his mother. "Son, when you hear this, you'll know." He didn't pause it. He let it play, as if her voice were clearing the way down the hallway. The ambulance door was open, the yellow light flashing, the engine roaring softly. They lifted the stretcher and secured the straps. The smell inside the vehicle was of plastic, alcohol, and wet rubber. Inside, the light was harsh. The paramedics checked the oxygen, the seat belts, the IV. Salgado got in too, serious, holding onto the bar above with one hand. Ramiro stayed outside, soaked by the rain, making the sign of the cross again, without noticing. Sophie hugged the guitar in the small doorway, her eyes huge, not knowing whether to go up or not. Lucy brought her face close to Mary Elena's and spoke softly. "We're coming. Yes, Mrs. Mary. Hold on to us." Diego leaned over, took his mother's hand, and brought it close to his face. The ambulance hit the first bump, and the audio repeated itself in a loop, "Son, when you hear this, you'll know." The sound seemed like a blessing and a knife at the same time. Then, out of nowhere, a tiny sigh, almost like trapped wind. Mary's mouth trembled, and a broken whisper came out, the air rasping. "Diego." Diego felt the name enter him like light. He leaned over his mother, his voice broken. "I'm here, Mom. I'm here." She tried harder, her jaw moving, her throat struggling. The house. Diego stared at her, crying. "You don't need to say it. Be quiet." But she insisted, stubborn as always. "She went to take care of her son. She's yours. You don't owe me anything." The air failed, her voice almost non-existent. "Just help the girl." The word girl exploded softly in the cabin. Sophie bit her lip and hid her face in the guitar. Lucy closed her eyes for a second, as if giving thanks. Salgado lowered his head. The audio remained low in the background of farewell and encounter at the same time. "Son, when you hear this, you'll already know." Diego kissed his mother's forehead. "I'll help her. I promise." His voice came out hoarse, wet with tears. "I promise, Mom." The ambulance crossed the night with its siren blaring. Outside, the city glistened wet. Inside, everything became small. The cold hand in the warm hand. The phrase spoken with the last breath. The guilt that found an answer. And for a moment, it seemed as if the whole world fit inside that cabin, while life continued to be forcibly carried on. But alive in the hospital, the doors opened, giving way to the team, who received, adjusted, checked monitors, turned them on, a constant, steady beep without fear. Mary's face was more colorful than before. Her chest rose and fell, short but firm, stabilizing. Lucy rested her forehead against the wall for a second and cried silently. Salgado squeezed her shoulder, speechless. The weight that had been in the air finally seemed to lift. Diego went out to the covered patio, cell phone in hand, his heart beating wildly. He called one acquaintance, then another, his voice firm but trembling. "I need to sell the car today, right now." The light rain turned to drizzle. The old but beloved car was there in the parking lot. A guy arrived, checked the engine, looked here and there, and they agreed on a price. The money went into Diego's account. He didn't look back. He put the keys in the guy's hand as if handing over a past. He went back inside, passed by the reception area, signed papers with the assistant, and spoke in a determined voice. "It's for Sophie's treatment. Put it in her name." He took a deep breath, and his chest opened up. "It's part of the house I promised my mom, helping another daughter." Sophie, on the other side, hugged the guitar to her chest, not understanding numbers, but understanding the gesture. Her eyes shone like someone receiving sunlight for the first time after a week of rain. In the hallway bathroom, Diego looked in the mirror. His long hair, tied back with an old hair tie, fell to his shoulders. He ran his hand through it slowly, as if saying goodbye. A barber on the night shift, called in on emergency duty by the hospital guards, put his suitcase on a sink, opened it, turned on the machine, and the buzzing filled the tiled room. "Sure, brother," he asked with a smile. Diego smiled crookedly with new tears. Old promise. He was trapped in a self that no longer exists. The first strand fell to the wet floor, then another and another. Little by little, Diego's face appeared completely, without hiding. He ran his palm over his newly cut head, and for the first time in a long time, recognized himself. In the administrative area, Dr. Harris arrived with his suit soaked. He took a deep breath when he saw the monitors and the equipment and the reports. He walked over to Lucy, who thought he was coming for another fight, but there was no knife in his voice. He was carrying a folded piece of paper. Rogers adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable with his human side. No proceedings, no suspension. He handed her the paper. "Your job is safe. I was wrong." Lucy could hardly believe it. Her eyes filled with tears. She grabbed the paper with both hands as if it were a baby. She didn't make a speech. She just said thank you. In the pediatric hallway, the social worker called, "Sophie, please come. We're going to start your evaluation. The funds have been released." The girl looked at Diego as if asking for permission. He sensed her with a trembling smile. "Go on, little one. Your music must continue." She walked slowly, hugging her guitar. Before entering the office, she turned back, took 2 steps back, and rested her forehead on Diego's arm in a quick, shy hug. She said nothing. It wasn't necessary. Lucy, seeing the scene, put her hand to her chest. Salgado leaned against the wall and sighed as if he had finally put down a weight he had been carrying all his life. The hospital was noisy with footsteps and beeps, but in that corner, everything was beautiful silence. Mary stood firm at the monitor. Sophie took the first step in her treatment. Diego gave what he had, and more. He gave what he had kept out of fear. Lucy stood with the paper in her hand, saying that she could continue to be who she is. And the night finally seemed less dark because, amid so much loss, a double reward was born. Life that clings on, and life that learns to give. The hospital room was simple, but full of life. The light walls reflected the soft morning light. An open window let in the smell of coffee coming from the hallway, and the distant sound of hurried footsteps. There were no more sirens, alarms, or desperate beeps. Only the calm rhythm of the monitors, which now seemed to sing a quiet song. Mary Elena sat in the armchair with a pillow supporting her back, her body still fragile, but her eyes awake and alive. On her lap was Sophie's guitar, a little too big for her, but positioned as if it had been made just for that moment. Mary slowly ran her fingers over the strings, feeling her way, pressing one note, releasing another, until suddenly a crooked chord full of noise came out. For a second, everyone held their breath. Then she laughed, a small laugh, almost apologetic, but sincere. The corners of her lips lifted, and her eyes sparkled. "Oh," she said softly in a hoarse voice, "I'm out of tune." Diego, sitting next to her, couldn't hold back. His eyes filled with tears, and they fell without asking permission. His hand trembled as he recorded with his cell phone. The image was shaky and out of focus, but he didn't care. He wanted to save that moment forever. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice trembling and broken. "Beautiful." Mary looked at her son and recognized those tears. She reached out with her free hand and gently touched his face, as if to say, "Don't cry anymore. It's over now." Diego leaned forward and rested his forehead on his hand, crying like a child. That's when Lucy entered slowly, without haste. She stood there for a moment, watching the scene, her eyes filled with tears, her chest filled with emotion. She walked over to Diego and crouched down next to him. She took the bandana out of her pocket, the one that had been her strength in the most difficult moments. The worn, soft fabric carried stories of pain, courage, and faith. She smiled a little and, with a simple gesture, put the bandana in Diego's shirt pocket. Her voice was calm, but firm. "Keep it." Diego looked at her in surprise and held his pocket with his hand, as if he had received a gift greater than any inheritance. His lips trembled, but he could find no words. He just cried more, hugging Lucy in a silence full of gratitude. Mary, watching everything, smiled again with the corners of her mouth. She held the guitar and tried another chord. It came out as crooked as the first, but no one cared. On the contrary, everyone laughed with tears in their eyes. At that moment, the metal of the oven, with its menacing crackling, no longer existed. There was no shadow or smell of fear. Everything that had once been pain was now a distant memory, erased by the light of a new morning. And what remained was just that: a mother playing the guitar badly, a son crying for love, a nurse delivering courage in the form of a handkerchief. The question that remains is simple but weighty. How many times do we bury life prematurely because we're in a hurry to end the pain? If this story touched you, tell me in the comments what moment made you cry. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories.